So the theme really is about delivering value with creativity. Um, and I think it's something that has been really important, certainly over the last few months, because I know that lots of brands have been really finding this a very challenging period, as we all have. So I'm delighted to be joined today by Rob Jones, who's the founder of Ultimate Sound and Vision. So before we get into the conversation, I just want to ask you, Rob, to just give us a bit of an overview of who you are, what you do, what you've done, and also, as a little bit of an icebreaker, tell us something we don't know about you. So over to you, Rob.
What you don't know about me is that I once had a record which reached number 11 in the Dutch charts, but went nowhere in the English charts. Exactly. So that was the end of a very short recording career.
I see. Okay.
I
won't ask you to give us a rendition. It's fine.
You're not getting it. No way. No chance. It was bad enough then. It'd be even worse now.
Okay.
Away from work, I've been the chairman of a non-league football club for 17 years, until a couple of years ago. I relinquished the position, and I'm very proud of that achievement, because I took it from basically one single under-11 side to the FA's Charter Club of the Year, with 36 teams, a semi-pro first team, stadium with lights, and very proud. And I was invited to the cup final by the FA, as you know, this part of their sort of done. You know.
Can you tell us which club it was? Or?
Yes, of course, Binfield Football Club, Football Club in Berkshire.
Amazing.
And they're just been knocked out of the FA Cup, sadly. But it was a real buzz, because during half time, the ticker tape logo going around Wembley said, "Congratulations to Rob Jones and Binfield Football Club, Charter Club of the Year." And, wow, my name's up in lights at
Brilliant.
Wembley.
Fantastic. So what about your career? Tell us about your career.
Oh, well, it's been a radio career to a large extent, and then television. Was going to be a chartered accountant, gave it up to go on the radio in Liverpool. So I was a DJ for 3 years in Liverpool. Then was lucky enough to get picked up by Radio Luxembourg, which was a big international station years ago. Still is, in terms of their German service and their French service. That I went on to become program director there, and then program director of English language television and radio programs. That was the greatest company to work for, RTL, part of Bertelsmann now, brilliant company. Yeah. And then left there to join the fledgling Sky Channel. Was head of music at Sky Channel for a couple of years, and then Richard Branson asked me to go and run his broadcasting operation, and so I ran a company called Music Box, which is an all-day music channel, and then Super Channel, which was a collaboration with ITV and various others, and then decided I'd start my own thing, because they were all making far more money than I was. And I thought, well, I've done it for them,
exactly.
So I'll help them. Why not do it for myself? So to a much lesser extent, started my own business, and that's morphed in the last couple of years into Ultimate Sound and Vision. And essentially, we're content producers, specializing in branded content, because we've had lots of experience in that over many years, from way back doing radio promotions when the brand would work more collaboratively with the media owner and devise what that content would be. Later, the stations got a little bit blasé, and the media buyers felt, oh, that's all a bit of a bother, having to do all that creative. So why don't we just buy the chart show or the so-and-so? We'll just buy sponsorships, because we don't have to think of an idea then, and it's nice and easy. So that's the experience we have. And then podcasts are something we're doing lots of now, and there's an absolutely exploding market, as I'm sure you're well aware. And I think we did our first podcast back in 2011 for the BBC. It's a podcast which I don't make anymore. It's in-house now with BBC Sounds, but it's called The Checkered Flag, and it's all about Formula One.
Okay.
And it's a good podcast, and I think at our height we were getting 75,000 downloads a week, which was quite good for the BBC at the time.
Yeah.
I think it's pretty average now in terms of podcasting or the big podcasts, but back then it was a very good number.
Yeah, well, that's great. I mean, it's great to hear about your amazing experience, and it's exactly why I thought it'd be great to have this discussion today about, how it's incredible to see how podcasts have really grown exponentially, and I think maybe that's down to the explosion in devices, because I mean, obviously, pre-pandemic, a lot more people were on the move and listening to it, but I think it's kind of held up really over the last few months, hasn't it? So maybe if you want to give us a view on how you think that podcasts specifically can deliver that value through creativity, what would be your advice in that area?
Well, I think that the great thing about podcasts is that it's like on-demand TV. People have listened to the radio, and radio is still doing very, very well indeed in this country, but the spoken word radio traditionally, of course, has been scheduled. So that program, Desert Island Discs, or You and Yours, would happen at a precise time on Radio 4 and whatever network it was on. And that's not always convenient, because it could be interesting content, but I'm not around to listen. I'm on the tube going to work, or used to be on the tube going to work, or whatever we do these days. So being able to access that content in your own time, very, very useful. Podcasts, though, have developed rather on the back of a creative idea of an individual who wanted to say something, wanted to express themselves. And then advertisers have gone along with that and said, well, that's a good audience, we'll buy into that audience. A little bit the same with influencers as well. They've had something they wanted to say, wanted to express themselves, and then they've accumulated an audience, and now a brand has jumped on board of that audience. That isn't always a brilliant thing, though. I know that my relation, someone in the family is a big media buyer for a government organisation, was for a while was doing a lot of buying influencers, but couldn't get them for very significant sums of money, could not get the influencers to say, tell them, what are you going to say then when you do this blog on Friday? Oh, don't worry, it'll be great. I know what you want me to say. No, I actually need to know what you're really going to say, because we're a government organisation, we need to know. So it's become a little bit of a risk in certain.
So it's kind of that whole control thing, isn't it? Yeah, losing a bit of control.
Yeah, but what's becoming more interesting, and what we're getting more involved in now, is podcasts, branded podcasts, where the idea has come from the objectives of the client, of a brand or whatever, and it's about sitting down with that client, as you would do with any other campaign, working out what's the objectives, and then podcasts, it's another route to market, and another route to that audience. But it's a very special route to that market, because this is a market which is very engaged. These listeners are very engaged. They've chosen to listen to your message. They've not just passed it, that billboard in the street. They didn't forget to go and put a cup of tea and watch the ad break on the telly. They've made a conscious decision to expose themselves to your content and your message. And I think that's increasingly what people are getting to understand now, and certainly we're talking to agencies about that, where they've got an objective, and then with our background in audio, we'd be able to say, well, here's an idea that would work and would sensibly get your objectives across. We're never going to be able to I think put the managing director on for 20 minutes to say how great his brand is. We've got to find a much more engaging way to do that. I mean, you never know, sometimes that might work, but generally speaking, we need to find an engaging way to get that message across, and the impetus has got to come from the brand, not the media owner.
Yeah, so I mean, essentially, it's classic branded content where people seeking out the content, not being interrupted by it, which is, the beauty. And I think that's where the power of branded content really is at its ultimate. But you're right. I mean, in terms of, getting that ideal mix of talent and message is, it's sometimes quite difficult, because you say, the brand wants to sell more stuff. So I get that, and I've got that over the last 20 years of talking about branded content and how powerful it is. But I mean, do you have a view on how long should we be talking on podcasts? I mean, generally I always say, if it's good enough, it's long enough. But, what is your sort of view on experience?
That's absolutely, that's a very good phrase, Andrew. I mean, I would agree with that completely. There's no defined length. I mean, some of the, I did a podcast for a client, or a demo podcast for a client, an American client, about 18 months ago. And we absolutely we threw everything at it. It was brilliant. We had a little bit which was recorded in the Bay at Monte Carlo. We did some stuff from the McLaren factory. It was just, I was very, very proud of it. And the BBC would have been very proud of it if it had been one of the programs we put out on their network. But this American client said, "Oh no, it's too much like a radio program." Okay, we honed it down to half an hour. It was just great. And he said to me, and this was a good learning. I was quite cross at the time when he told me, but it was a good learning. He said, go and listen to, and I forget the life of me now who it was, but it was an American sports journalist out of Boston who does a podcast. The podcast opens with him doing a well-crafted, well-written, probably 5-minute monologue, and then morphs into him and two guests for just under 2 hours. And it's very successful. It's very successul.
Amazing.
And so the length of it doesn't matter. It really doesn't matter. In the UK, podcast listening is quite invasive is the wrong word. Engaging, in as much as generally the average is people listen to 85% of the podcast. So not the first 5 minutes, or with a YouTube clip, the first 3.5 seconds.
Yeah.
When you've made that decision to go to a podcast, you're probably going to listen to 85% of it, if not 100% of it. So the length doesn't matter as long as it's engaging. Once it gets boring, then of course, like anything, nobody's bothered anymore. But no, I don't think there's any hard and fast rule. I mean, I've been talking to Piers Morgan about doing a daily podcast, 4 minutes, which I'm not sure it'll happen or not, but I felt that him ranting for 4 minutes was a brilliant idea, rather than having to. I mean, and he's got 4 minutes just walking from the studio to the car park, So,
some people will probably say that's 4 minutes too long, but I get it.
Indeed. In fact, it's funny that talent, you mentioned it before. Talent is very difficult. We're talking to a couple of people now about a podcast with Sharon Osbourne, and some people completely, she wouldn't mind me saying this, completely frightened off by her. Oh no, they know she'll get a good audience, but not for us. Thank you very much indeed. So talent is quite important. But I think there's no hard and fast rules. But I think the creativity, you say, Andrew, absolutely vital. And we say there's sort of the 4 or 5 things you need to think about with a podcast is, first of all, the idea. Second, the talent. Third, where and how you record it. Do you record it on location? Because you can, because it's not expensive. In real terms, it's quite cheap. Do you do it in a studio? Do you do it down the line, as we're doing now? Lots of podcasts during this period have been done down the line. The next bit is the most important bit, editing. The editing is the magic. And that's where an average amateur podcast compares to a professionally done podcast. That's the difference.
That's the difference, Well, I think it's about, getting the right people doing the right things. It's working with the experts. And I think that's really important. So, I mean, we mentioned brands. I mean, do you have a view on, who's doing podcasts really well? Is there any brand that you think has really, taken this on board? Let's hear some of those examples.
Well, we do one called the Pet Pod with YouMove, which is a vitamin supplement for pets, and we do it with a vet called Zara Bolland, and we've coordinated with DEFRA. And especially, and we're going to be doing more with them in the new year as we leave the European Union. There are lots of issues to be dealt with in terms of pets, so they're good. But that's one we do. A couple that we don't do, have nothing to do with, but that I admire, is Women in Business. which is a NatWest podcast.
Right.
It's not running now, it's a short series. I think it's coming back, and that was very well put together, designed. Their objective in that was to get young businesswomen to engage with the whole idea of women in business, and then why not think about NatWest and talk about NatWest for them.
Makes sense.
And then the other one I really like personally is Land Rover. Land Rover did a podcast a little while ago, but only a series of 7.
Yes.
And it was quite clever because they went out into the country, and it was a podcast you could all listen to in the car.
Yeah.
And explain the magnificence of the countryside here and there. Of course, what they didn't do was the absolute obvious next step, which they haven't done yet, or they just haven't thought about it. And there is an absolutely huge obvious next step.
Yeah. No, I agree. I love that. And it won lots of awards, and they had fantastic people like Dame Alice, Dr. Alice Roberts, I think, and, some brilliant people on it. With very, easily recognizable voices, which is obviously helpful. But I think that's a good point. But, like with a broadcast series, it tends to run in, it tends to run in, a series of 6, 13 episodes. Do people, are we thinking about, podcasts as episodic type content? Should we be thinking in that way?
If you're thinking of doing 6 podcasts, then get yourself 10 times more money to market it than you're spending on it.
Right.
Because podcasts are not about a 6 off or a 7 off.
No.
They're just not. What has been a very, very successful podcast, and I plug my son here because he produces it, is The High-Low with Dolly and Pandora. And Dolly and Pandora are up now. Well, they've been doing, I think it's dropped off a little bit because they've been concentrating on their book, but it's been doing 1.3 million downloads a month.
Wow.
And they've been getting ad revenue around about 100,000 quid a month.
But
that only started on episode 120.
God, really?
So they've been doing that for 3 or 4 years.
Yes.
And they've built that audience, it's become a habit. Yeah. It is a topical one, so you're perhaps not going to go back and listen to episode 4, because that was 4 years ago and they were talking about something that was going on then. But that's, it does take time to build them. Adam Buxton, probably the second most successful podcast in the UK. He's into 130, 140 podcasts he's done now, but it doesn't happen overnight, unless of course you want to spend loads of money marketing it.
Yeah.
And what's also changed the market a little bit is BBC Sounds. Because BBC Sounds has taken podcasts to a new level with the general population, but of course there are no adverts on those BBC Sounds podcasts. Brilliant as they are, there's no room for advertising yet. I wonder if that will come at some stage.
Well, I was going to say, we talk a lot about the future of how the market's going to evolve. What are you thinking now? I mean, obviously we've come through a very difficult, unprecedented period with the pandemic, and obviously people have got a lot more time, on their hands, I guess, in certain instances. But do you see how do you see it sort of evolving post pandemic, and when the vaccine comes in and we're all changing our lives and get back to a new normal?
The popular belief was that podcasts were all about your commute, and certainly a year ago, 2 years ago, podcasting was particularly prevalent. Podcast listening was particularly prevalent in London, with those long, probably longer commutes than anyone had. But the pandemic, with nobody going to work, people still being at home, has not seen the demise of podcast listening. In fact, we're up at 10.1 million, people listening to podcasts every week right now, which is just fantastic. So the pandemic hasn't taken that away. I'm sure people are being more selective, and there's certainly more choice for them out there. So I think that it's beginning to separate a little bit into 2 divisions. There's the Premier League of podcasts, of which many of the BBC Sounds podcasts would be in, but things like Land Rover would be in, The High-Low would be in that, Adam Buxton would be in that, where they're getting hundreds of thousands of listens a month. And then there's 2 million other podcasts that are just not being listened to at all. And that's fine, because the people doing them are probably having great fun doing them, because it's easy to do, and their circle of friends. In fact, little example. At the beginning of the lockdown, the first lockdown, I thought I live in a little village called Sonning, near Reading on the Thames. And it's a nice little community. So I thought, well, just for fun, and I was prompted by a guy called James around the corner. James did, in the High Street, did a ministry of silly walks. He made the news.
Oh, yes, I saw that.
Probably, I think
Brilliant. Yes, yes.
James lives just around the corner. So I thought, well, I'll do a short series of podcasts. And we had great fun. James came on the first one and we talked about his thing and whatever.
Yeah.
But then the most successful one I did, and we have, we're lucky enough to, George Clooney lives in the village as well.
That helps.
So yes, that sort of, people are aware of these things. But the most popular ones, quite seriously, were Nigel the Postman, because everyone in our village knows Nigel.
Right.
They want to hear him say that George Clooney doesn't get much mail.
Brilliant.
But also the other one was the lock keeper, because we have the Sonny Lock at the bottom of the garden here, and the lock keeper told a fascinating story. So we really enjoyed doing it. Our little village enjoyed listening to it. And we had 300 or 400 listens to each one. It was fun.
Exactly.
But I think we will separate out into Premier League.
Different levels. Yeah, absolutely. Okay, I think we're coming to the end really of our discussion, and it's been really fascinating. And I want to thank you for sharing such brilliant advice and expertise. But is there anything we should be doing as an organisation, as an industry, that helps you to do more business in the world of podcasting, branded podcasts? What do you think is missing?
With the conference is a really good idea, and making people aware. I think people are very well. I mean, I had literally last week 2 agencies rang up to say, we've got clients who want to do podcasts. What should we do? How do you do them? And well, I'm sure they must have known how to do them, but I think they wanted the process, the cost, and what's been successful. I mean, I think you have to get buy-in. I mean, I would like to mention the On the Couch with Marie Curie, which is a podcast we do, which has been super successful because, and it sounds very harrowing, and it is in some senses, but it's about, Marie Curie is about end-of-life care, of course. And we've been knocked out by the number of celebrities, Hugh Grant, and people like that, who've come on the podcast to talk about the death of someone in their family, and I think it's engaging very much for people. Not the person themselves is quite good. I mean, I know everyone we've had on it has really enjoyed being on it, and it is a deathly subject, obviously, but there can be some light moments in it as well. And we have lots of letters from Marie Curie listeners and people involved with Marie Curie to say, this has been so helpful to me knowing that my mother was dying, or this was, was happening. So that's been very good. So I think for brands, they've got to think carefully about who they get to do their podcast. The person who does the Marie Curie podcast is nobody anyone has heard of, Jason, who was a counsellor with Marie Curie. And that's work to treat. But in terms of the branded content organization, I think it's about just educating a little bit more, giving people more information about what's possible. And I suppose also the fact that some agencies will think, we can't make much money out of podcasts because they're very cheap to produce. And they can be cheap to produce. I mean, anything we produce, the bottom end will be 500 quid a podcast. But we're producing stuff at 10,000 quid a podcast as well at the other end.
Sure. Yeah, there's a whole range.
The whole range. So I think it's about educating people about the process. And can I just say, happy Branded Content Day.
Thank you to Rob Jones of Ultimate Sound and Vision and BCMA member. I hope you found his views and expert advice interesting and useful. I'm Andrew Cantor, the Global CEO of the BCMA. If you want to find out any more about the organisation, please visit www.thebcma.info. Thanks for watching and see you soon.